Welcome to Creative Spirit Gathering. I'm your host, Reverend Jen Hutchins with Unity Arts Ministry. This is your place for exploring and expressing in your art journal what is on your mind and heart. And today we're going to be looking at geometric shapes as inspiration to get us started for our journal project today. This is one of those projects where any materials you want to work with will work just fine. You could do this with collage, with paint, with any sort of drawing materials, crayons, pens, you name it, you can finger paint into this one, whatever sounds like fun today. It's really just about leaning into process. We've been talking about shape, and last week we did discussion around organic shapes. So those free flowing, sort of curvy edges, things that didn't have like a solid definable, ooh, I recognize what that is. Today, we're turning the table on that. We're going geometric shape. These are going to be shapes that like off the bat, you recognize, right? What do you see on the page? We can identify them. I see hearts, I see circles, I see rectangles dividing the page. Things that, we can pretty easily put a label on are examples of geometric shape. So to take that even just a little bit further, I made a little PowerPoint here. Geometric shapes are things that are based on math principles like square, circle, triangle. Shapes often look deliberate, sometimes have a straight edge, not always, right? Sometimes there's still a little bit of curve on there, but we're going to see a lot of straight edges or a mechanically smooth curve. We might often see sharp angles as well. And this little sample that I pulled out for you has a lot of these things in it. We're going to see circles, some rectangles, some triangles, and those points, sort of arrow points, some sharp edges, and those round curves. Now, the fun thing about geometric shapes is because there's something that is so identifiable, oftentimes people will use them and attribute specific meanings to them. So we can look at the implied meaning, whether it's a metaphorical meaning or a spiritual meaning that is often used in art by these shapes. For example, triangle, because of its like stability, it can, that 3 points, right? It can represent balance and harmony. It could also relate to any sort of threefold idea like body, mind, spirit, or the idea of the Trinity. Squares, practical, solid energy. They're often foundational. Think about like the base of a building, a pyramid even, has that square structure to it. Squares are dependable. They're grounding. They provide us with a sense of safety. So even just looking at this grid over here, although it might be like, somebody's bathroom wall for all we know, it feels safe, right? It's very predictable. It doesn't feel like it's going to create any sort of change, that we're unexpected. So it can be a symbol of safety that we can use in our artwork as well. Circles, another thing that we see so often in art and just in the world around us, and symbols idea around circle, because it seems to have no beginning or end, can be a symbol of oneness, symbol of unity. Think about rings even, right? That idea of oneness, that we use them in rituals so often. And finally, we have the spiral. This is a shape, again, that we see often in nature, we see out in the world, and people use intentionally in art. I know it shows up in my art journal a lot. And spirals, if we're looking at intentionally working with them for symbolism, it can represent connectivity with the divine, the evolution of the spirit, right? Kind of going from one point to another, or transition, development. So these really simple shapes, the triangle, the circle, the square, the spiral can be used to create deep meaning in our artwork and in our journals, right? If we're trying to look at where in my life do I feel grounded, supported, safe, we might wish to create squares to contain those ideas because it's connecting with the ideas that we're working with in our own lives. Likewise, if we're feeling overwhelmed by things in life and we're trying to figure out where's that sense of balance, where's the wholeness, how am I bringing things together, we might work with circles to represent that wholeness, that never-ending circle idea. Now, I shared with you my journal page here, which happen to have hearts as well. Hearts, of course, often a symbol of love. And so we can work with shapes that we recognize and we have our own identity with. We have our own intentions or reasons behind the shape, or we might just play around with different shapes because we like them, right? We don't have to have a reason behind it. But when we intentionally work with shapes, we can have a journal page that connects those thoughts with the images in really simple ways, right? We don't have to overly overthink it, complicate things on the page. Sometimes it can be as simple as creating a bunch of circles. In this case, I used some painter's tape and I just used that as a template to stick my pen inside the circle and just keep tracing. So this is actually the project I'm going to be working on today. So I started with my circles, just overlapping circles and seeing what shapes they create. And then my intention is to use watercolor paint as a process of just moving into the flow of being present with the process of making art and see what emerges for me. A lot of times when I'm just putting brush to the page or pen to the page, I'll start to slow down, right? It's like I notice my thoughts slowing down a bit. So I'm concerned about what happened yesterday or what's going to happen later today. I'm just present with the experience, which is one of the joys of keeping an art journal, is it's a place where we can just lean in to the present moment. And then by giving myself that space to be present, oftentimes I can hear that whisper of spirit, that still small voice that has something positive to say, or that is like, hey, I've noticed this has been, you're leaning into worry on something. Here's a way to look at that differently. And so just by being present to the process of art, so often we find that we open ourselves up to guidance, to answers, to little bits of spiritual wisdom that are waiting for us. And we're so busy in our daily lives that we don't hear them as clearly. So today it's almost a meditation on the page. It's an invitation to play with shape, any shape that seems to be calling to you. You can use some of these ideas of the symbols behind the shapes, such as circle for wholeness, hearts for love, and spirals if you're looking at change and transformation, whatever's calling to you. Or again, make up your own things. What happens when you mix all of them together on the page, just playing around with shape and filling in, doing something simple that allows you to be present. Now, I said you could do this with any materials. I'm choosing watercolor paint today for this, but imagine I could go in here and I could put glue down and collage into each of these little spaces. I could get crayons. I could, finger paint into the little spaces. Or maybe I create this and then cover up the whole thing, smear it all up. There's no rules to this. Words might end up on the page. You never know, right? Where you let the process take you. Since I shared this one with you earlier, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the two sides here. So this one started very similar, where I traced the hearts and the circles onto the page first, filled them in with paint, allowing myself to be present, And then here was the message that was coming through to me, was the text that I ended up putting on here. But in order for the text to be legible, I first created just a wash of a semi-transparent paint over the background that I had. So it was a lighter color. You can still see the image through it, but because it has that lighter color to it, I can now still read the text. So it was one of those moments where I wanted to see the text at the end. I know sometimes we intentionally cover that text up, but I usually like to keep those bits of wisdom front and center. And so that's how I did that one. As far as things that you can use as like a template to trace with, I know some of you have stencils on hand. Some of you may already have a stash of things like bottle tops that you use for stamping. If you look around the space around you, wherever you are, I'm sure you can find many examples of geometric shapes. And so as we find those things, it's so easy to just place them on the page and trace, move, trace, move, trace. If you want to get complicated with it, get your ruler out and measure how far apart everything is, you're welcome to do that. If you want to, like really figure out the golden ratio for that perfect spiral on the page, and use your compass to set it all up, have at it. My process tends to be a little more organic, free-flowing, even with geometric patterns. But I looked around my space and I found I had a square coaster sitting on my desk. I have my paint box has several different shapes of like juice tops or water bottle caps that I save for tracing and painting. I shared with you my painter's tape. I've got like rectangles and cards on my desk. So I'm sure you've got lots of things lying around. I challenge you to be creative with it and see what happens. If you have an idea for something, you're like, I really wanted a heart, but I don't have a heart handy, use a little piece of cardboard, grab something out of your recycling bin, and you can cut the shape that you want, and then you can use it as a template for repeating your patterns and shapes on the page. So this one, really open-ended. I'm excited to see what you all come up with, how that idea of geometric shape and just leaning into the process sort of as a meditative experience, what comes forward for you and how you feel by the end of our time together. Hopefully more relaxed, more presence, and filled with creative spirit. Let's take these ideas into a time of meditation before we move into our journal practice. So wherever you are, take a moment, roll those shoulders, adjust your hips in the seat. Where it feels comfortable for you, you may wish to put your feet flat on the floor. Feel that sense of connected and grounded energy. And just notice, what does that feel like? What's your body feeling right now in this moment? As we settle in. If you haven't already done so, you may wish to close your outer eyes, bring your focus inward, or keep your gaze softened on something before you. And once your body has settled, I invite you to take a couple of deep breaths here, letting each breath bring you to a more deeply relaxed state of being. Notice the flow of the breath. The breath flows gently without us having to force or push anything. It has a natural rhythm to it. Just like life, when we relax and let go into the present flow. And as we let the breath settle us, just take a moment and notice if there are active thoughts in the mind, thoughts trying to take you away from the present moment. If so, let them know that they are important, but we will reserve time later for presencing them. Right now, we are just being present with this moment. Breathing in, breathing out. We drop from the head space to the heart space. Dropping from thinking to being a presence of love, a presence of light, a presence of peace, right here and now. And breathe into the heart space for a moment of silence. And on the next breath, begin to bring our awareness from the heart, carrying that sense of peace with us, into our head space, peace radiating through our bodies. As we gently move our fingers and toes, knowing that we are here, right now. Beautiful, beautiful flow and expression. And as we gently flutter our eyes open, we then move into our creative process, allowing ourselves to be guided by this inner flow as we explore and express through geometric shapes on the page, deepening our meditation. Enjoy the process, my friends.